The invitation that never came. Have you ever discovered that the people who claim to love you are embarrassed by you? Not because you did anything wrong, not because you hurt anyone, but simply because you didn't become the kind of person they could brag about. My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 33 years old. And 3 years ago, my family decided I wasn't important enough to be seen. What they didn't know was that 6 months later, they would need something only I could give them. And by then, everything had changed. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table grading history exams. Outside my apartment window, snow drifted across the parking lot under yellow streetlights. Inside, the heater rattled like it was fighting for its life. It wasn't a glamorous apartment. The carpet was old. The kitchen was small. The furniture came from thrift stores and yard sales. But it was mine. Every bill had been paid by me. Every piece of furniture had been bought by me. Every inch of that little apartment represented independence. I was halfway through reading an essay about the American Revolution when my phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen for a moment. My mother rarely called without a reason. And the reason was rarely good. I answered anyway. Hi, Mom. Hannah. Her voice was unusually cheerful. That should have warned me. We need to discuss Saturday. I set my red pen down. Saturday was Olivia's engagement celebration. A private dinner hosted at a luxury country club outside Chicago. For weeks, my mother had talked about nothing else. What about it? I asked. A pause. Then another. The kind of pause that always meant trouble. Olivia has some concerns. There it was. The familiar feeling. Like standing outside in winter without a coat. What concerns? About the guest list. I already knew. Before she said another word, I knew. Somehow, I always knew. Hannah. Her voice softened. Olivia thinks it might be better if you skip this event. Silence. I heard the ticking of the clock on my wall. I heard a car passing outside. I heard my own heartbeat. But for a moment, I couldn't hear anything else. Skip it. Just this once. I laughed. A small laugh. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes the truth becomes so ridiculous that laughter is the only response. Why? Another pause. Then my mother finally said it. Ethan's family will be there. Ethan Mercer. Olivia's fiancé. 36. Partner at one of the largest investment firms in Illinois. Comes from old money. The kind of money that never worries. The kind of money that quietly owns things. His family owned hotels. Commercial properties. Investment funds. According to my mother, they practically owned half the city. I wasn't impressed. But she certainly was. What does that have to do with me? Hannah, please don't make this difficult. There it was again. The phrase mothers use when they want obedience disguised as cooperation. I'm asking a question. A longer pause. Then she sighed. As a teacher, you might not have much in common with Ethan's family. I blinked. Slowly. Carefully. As a teacher. She emphasized the word. The same way someone might say janitor. Or cashier. Or unemployed. Something less. Something embarrassing. I have a master's degree. I know. I teach advanced placement history. I know. I've been teaching for 11 years. I know. The irritation entered her voice. As if my accomplishments were becoming inconvenient. Then she delivered the real reason. Olivia doesn't want any awkward comparisons. Comparisons. Interesting. Because nobody had ever compared me to Olivia before. Not fairly. Not honestly. Not once. Growing up, Olivia had always been the star. The beautiful daughter. The outgoing daughter. The ambitious daughter. The successful daughter. And I had become the reliable one. The practical one. The quiet one. The daughter who never caused problems. The daughter who understood. Always understood. Hannah understands. That phrase had followed me my entire life. Olivia gets the bigger bedroom. Hannah understands. Olivia needs help with rent. Hannah understands. Olivia needs money for graduate school. Hannah understands. Olivia needs attention. Hannah understands. Eventually, people stop asking. They simply assume you'll sacrifice yourself. Because you always have. My mother continued speaking. Ethan's parents move in very elite circles. Elite circles. I almost laughed again. And Olivia wants to make the best impression possible. The meaning landed exactly where it was intended. My job. My salary. My life. My existence. Could damage that impression. For a moment, I looked around my apartment. The bookshelves filled with student gifts. The framed thank you notes. The photographs from field trips. The stack of college acceptance letters former students had mailed me over the years. This was the life my family found embarrassing. A life spent helping teenagers believe in themselves. A life spent teaching. A life spent making a difference. And somehow that wasn't enough. Not for them. Hannah. I realized my mother was waiting. Waiting for compliance. Waiting for understanding. Waiting for the daughter who never fought back. I surprised both of us. Okay. The word came out calm. Almost cheerful. My mother exhaled in relief. I knew you'd be reasonable. Of course. Reasonable. That's what they called surrender. We'll see you another time. Sure. Don't be upset. I'm not. That part was true. Oddly enough, I wasn't upset. Not yet. I was tired. A different feeling entirely. A deeper feeling. The kind that develops after years of disappointment. The kind that eventually turns into clarity. We hung up. I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I picked up my grading pen again. But I couldn't focus. Because a memory kept returning. My grandmother's voice. Soft. Certain. Patient. One sentence. Repeated countless times. One day they'll regret underestimating you. At the time, I never believed her. Now I wondered. Maybe she knew something I didn't. The next morning at school, my students noticed immediately. Teachers like to pretend they're good at hiding emotions. We aren't. Teenagers notice everything. Especially the things adults think they're concealing. Miss Brooks. I looked up. A student named Lily sat in the front row. Smart. Observant. Dangerously perceptive. You okay? I'm fine. She raised an eyebrow. The universal expression of disbelief. You look like you're thinking about murder. The class laughed. Even I smiled. No murder. You sure? Pretty sure. Okay. She nodded. Because if someone deserves it, we can help. More laughter. The tension eased. For a moment, I forgot about the phone call. Forgot about Olivia. Forgot about Saturday. And remembered why I loved teaching. These students didn't care how much money I made. They didn't care where I lived. They didn't care whether rich people approved of me. They cared whether I showed up. Whether I listened. Whether I helped. Sometimes that felt more honest than family. Saturday arrived cold and gray. The engagement dinner started at 6. By 6:30, I was sitting alone on my couch. Wearing sweatpants. Watching documentaries. Not because I wanted to. Because there was nowhere else to be. My phone remained silent most of the evening. Until 8:17 p.m. Then it buzzed. Olivia. A text message. One photo. No greeting. No explanation. Just a photograph. I opened it. The image showed a long table beneath crystal chandeliers. Everyone smiling. Everyone laughing. Everyone looking happy. My parents. My sister. Ethan. His family. Friends. Relatives. A celebration. A family gathering. Without me. The caption beneath the image contained only 4 words. Everything went perfectly tonight. I stared at the screen. For a long time. Then I zoomed in. And noticed something interesting. At the far end of the table sat an elderly man. Silver hair. Sharp eyes. Expensive suit. Everyone else appeared relaxed around him. Comfortable. Respectful. Whoever he was, he mattered. A lot. And strangely, he looked familiar. I couldn't place why. Not yet. But something about his face tugged at a memory. A memory connected to my grandmother. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. I set the phone down. And for the first time all evening, I felt something besides sadness. Curiosity. Because sometimes the smallest details become the beginning of the biggest changes. And somewhere across the city, at that exact moment, a secret my grandmother had protected for decades was already moving toward the surface. A secret that would change everything my family believed about me. And everything I believed about myself. The secret her grandmother never told anyone. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. Not my family. Not the engagement party. Not even Olivia's smug message. It was the older man, sitting at the end of the table. I knew I'd seen him before. Somewhere. Somehow. The feeling stayed with me all Sunday. While I cleaned my apartment. While I prepared lessons for Monday. While I graded assignments. His face kept appearing in my mind. Familiar. Important. Connected to something I couldn't quite remember. By Sunday evening, frustration finally won. I opened an old storage box in my bedroom closet. Inside were dozens of photographs that had belonged to my grandmother. Most people keep photo albums. Grandma Evelyn kept history. Every picture had notes on the back. Dates. Locations. Names. Stories. She believed memories deserved context. I spent nearly an hour flipping through old family photographs. Birthday parties. Graduations. Christmas mornings. Summer vacations. Then I found it. A picture taken almost 15 years earlier. My grandparents standing outside a hotel in downtown Chicago. And beside my grandfather. The same man. Older now. But unmistakably the same. I turned the photograph over. Grandma's handwriting filled the back. William Mercer and Richard Brooks, summer 2009. Mercer. The last name hit me immediately. Ethan Mercer. Olivia's fiancé. I stared at the photograph. My pulse suddenly quickening. Why would Ethan's grandfather know my grandparents? Not casually. Not enough to appear in family photos. Something didn't make sense. Monday morning brought another surprise. At lunch, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I ignored unknown numbers. For some reason, I answered. Hannah Brooks. Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Collins. I'm calling from Mercer Holdings. I nearly dropped the phone. Mercer Holdings. The Mercer family company. What can I do for you? There was a brief pause. As strange as this may sound, Mr. William Mercer would like to meet with you. I blinked. Once. Twice. What? He asked me to contact you personally. I looked around the empty classroom, certain I'd misunderstood. Why? I'm afraid he didn't explain. Of course he didn't. People with billions rarely explain themselves. They're having a private luncheon Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Mercer specifically requested your presence. The room suddenly felt smaller. Requested mine. Yes. And he knows who I am. He does. Now I was completely confused. Are you sure? A small laugh. Mr. Mercer is 90 years old, Miss Brooks. His memory is better than mine. I didn't know what to say. The entire situation felt impossible. Why would one of the wealthiest men in Illinois want to meet a public school teacher? Finally, I agreed. Mostly because curiosity had become impossible to ignore. Wednesday arrived. The luncheon took place at a private club overlooking Lake Michigan. The kind of place where membership waiting lists lasted years. The kind of place my family would have bragged about entering. I felt wildly out of place. My navy blue dress was simple, professional, affordable. Everyone else seemed dressed in the sort of clothing that cost more than my monthly rent. A hostess led me through a private dining room. And there he was, William Mercer, the man from the photograph, the man from Olivia's engagement dinner, the man who had somehow known my grandparents. He stood when I entered, which surprised me. Most wealthy people expect others to stand for them, not the other way around. Hannah. His smile appeared genuine. Thank you for coming. I shook his hand. His grip remained surprisingly strong for 90 years old. It's nice to meet you. No. He smiled again. We've met before. That statement hit me like a truck. We have. You were 14. I stared. He laughed. I suspected you wouldn't remember. And suddenly, I did. Fragments. Tiny pieces. A summer barbecue. My grandparents' backyard. A group of adults talking business. A man giving me advice about college. William Mercer. Oh my God. There she is. He looked delighted. You remember. Just barely. He motioned toward a chair. Please sit. Lunch arrived. Conversation began. For 30 minutes, we talked about everything except the reason I was there. Teaching. History. Students. Life. To my surprise, he seemed genuinely interested. Not politely interested. Actually interested. Most people stopped listening the moment they learned I was a teacher. William Mercer asked follow-up questions. He wanted details. He wanted stories. He wanted to know why I loved the job. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Mr. Mercer. William. William. He nodded approvingly. Why am I here? The old man's expression softened. For the first time all afternoon, he looked serious. Because your grandmother asked me to watch over you. The words landed heavily. My grandmother had been dead nearly 3 years. What? Evelyn was one of my closest friends. I stared. No. Not possible. My grandmother never mentioned that. Ever. William seemed to read my thoughts. She didn't tell many people. Why not? Because most people only respect friendships when both people have money. That sounded exactly like something Grandma would say. He continued. Your grandmother helped me during the worst period of my life. I leaned forward, listening. When my wife died, everyone disappeared. His voice grew quieter. Business partners disappeared. Friends disappeared. Relatives disappeared. But Evelyn stayed. He smiled sadly. Every Thursday for 6 years. I swallowed. Grandma had never mentioned any of this. Not once. She saved my life. The room fell silent. Then William reached into his jacket pocket. He removed an envelope. Old. Worn. Sealed. My name written across the front. In my grandmother's handwriting. I froze. What is that? Evelyn gave this to me. His eyes met mine. She told me to deliver it only if the day ever came when your family stopped seeing your value. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. William slowly pushed the envelope across the table. Toward me. I think that day has arrived. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt fragile. Ancient. Important. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. 3 pages. The first line nearly made me cry. My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, then something happened exactly the way I feared it might. I blinked hard, fighting tears, and kept reading. The people who underestimate you are making a mistake. Not because you're smarter than they are. Not because you're better than they are. But because they only measure value in ways they understand. You were always different. You care about things that don't produce applause. You help people who can never repay you. You build things nobody notices until years later. That is rare. And rare things are often overlooked by foolish people. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes. And continued. There is something I never told the family. Not even your parents. One day you will learn why. When that day comes, remember this. Power is not a reward. It is a responsibility. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. But never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than respect. The letter ended with 4 words. 4 words that echoed through my chest. I always believed you. Not believed in you. Believed you. As if she knew. As if she had always seen exactly what was happening. Even when nobody else did. I looked up. William Mercer was watching quietly. Giving me space. Giving me time. Finally, I spoke. What did she mean? His expression changed. Careful now. Measured. Almost cautious. I think, he said slowly, that answer is coming sooner than either of us expected. Before I could ask another question, his assistant entered the room. She looked nervous. Very nervous. Mr. Mercer. Something in her voice immediately felt wrong. What is it? She handed him a tablet. William read the screen. Then sighed. Deeply. The way people sigh when a storm they've been expecting finally arrives. He looked at me. Hannah. Yes. I believe your sister and Ethan just announced their engagement date. I frowned. Okay. William turned the tablet toward me. I read the headline and instantly understood why he looked concerned. Because beneath the engagement announcement was another story. A business story. One involving a major development project. A project worth nearly $200 million. A project sitting on land that, according to the article, had once belonged to my grandmother. And apparently, someone had forgotten to tell Olivia one very important detail. A detail hidden for years. A detail capable of changing everything. Including the wedding. Including the business deal. Including my entire relationship with my family. And for the first time, I began to suspect that my grandmother's real secret had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with ownership, the property nobody knew existed. For several seconds, I simply stared at the article. The headline itself wasn't surprising. People like Olivia and Ethan announced things publicly all the time. Engagements, business partnerships, charity events, luxury vacations. Everything became content. Everything became branding. What caught my attention was the photograph beneath the headline. A large piece of land, nearly 40 acres, located on the northern edge of Chicago. According to the article, Ethan's investment group planned to transform it into a luxury mixed-use development. Condominiums, retail spaces, office towers, restaurants. The projected value exceeded $200 million. The article described it as one of the most important projects in the city. But one sentence made my stomach tighten. The project occupies land originally acquired by the Brooks family in the 1960s. Brooks family. My family. I looked up. William Mercer was studying my reaction carefully. You knew? No. I shook my head. I've never heard of it. William nodded slowly. I suspected as much. Why? His expression darkened. Because your grandmother never trusted certain members of your family with the full truth. That wasn't exactly reassuring. What truth? Instead of answering immediately, he leaned back. The old man looked suddenly tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone preparing to reopen an old wound. Do you know how your grandfather built his wealth? I laughed softly. Wealth? William didn't laugh. Hannah. The seriousness in his voice made me stop. Your grandfather wasn't wealthy when he died. He paused. But he was wealthy once. The room seemed to shrink around me. What? William folded his hands together. Your grandfather and I started in real estate together. My pulse quickened. Every sentence seemed to make less sense than the one before it. He invested early. Very early. He bought land nobody wanted. He took risks nobody else would take. He made millions. Millions. My grandfather had worked as a mechanic. At least that's what I'd always been told. William watched my confusion. That wasn't the whole story. Apparently. Not even close. An hour later, I sat in William's private office overlooking the lake. Documents covered the conference table. Old contracts. Property records. Tax filings. Letters. Corporate paperwork. Decades of history. A history nobody had ever shared with me. William pointed toward one yellow document. Your grandfather purchased this parcel in 1967. I looked at the address. The same address mentioned in the article. The development site. The entire property. Yes. My mouth went dry. How much did he pay? William smiled faintly. $22,000. I stared. The land alone was now worth hundreds of millions. That's impossible. Real estate often looks impossible in hindsight. He slid another document toward me. A transfer agreement. Dated 15 years later. Then another. Then another. Ownership structures changed repeatedly. Companies formed. Companies dissolved. Trusts created. Assets moved. The paperwork became increasingly complicated. Until eventually, I noticed something. One name kept appearing. Again and again. Evelyn Brooks. My grandmother. Not my grandfather. My grandmother. She seemed connected to everything. Every company. Every trust. Every major decision. I looked up. Grandma controlled all of this. William nodded. Most of it. That shouldn't have shocked me. The more I learned about Grandma, the more obvious it became. She had always been smarter than people realized. The difference was that she never needed attention. She never needed credit. Meanwhile, everyone else mistook silence for weakness. A mistake I'd experienced my entire life. "What happened?" I asked. William sighed. "The short version." I nodded. "Your grandfather became successful. Very successful. But success attracted the wrong people." His voice carried traces of old disappointment. Business partners, relatives, friends. Everyone wanted something. Over time, poor decisions followed. Bad investments, bad loans, bad partnerships. The fortune began shrinking, then shrinking faster, until eventually, most of it disappeared. I glanced down at the documents. So what survived? William tapped a folder. This. The property. The land. The development site. One asset. Protected for decades. Hidden. Preserved. My grandmother's final safeguard. But why hide it? William's answer came instantly. Because she knew what would happen if certain people found out. Olivia. Mom. Possibly Dad. The realization arrived naturally. No explanation required. William could see it in my face. Exactly. He leaned forward. Evelyn loved her family. But she understood human nature. Especially when money enters the conversation. I remembered the engagement dinner photograph. The family who considered my teaching career embarrassing. The family obsessed with status. The family who measured worth through appearances. Suddenly, Grandma's secrecy made perfect sense. What does this have to do with me? William was quiet. For several moments, he simply looked at me. Then he opened another folder. Inside sat a single document. One page. One signature. One name. Mine. Or rather, future mine. Prepared years ago. What is this? Evelyn's final instruction. I felt my heartbeat quicken. William slowly pushed the paper across the table. Toward me. I read the first line. Then the second. Then the third. By the fourth line, I stopped breathing. Because the document stated something I never imagined possible. The land wasn't owned by Ethan's investment group. Not entirely. It wasn't even owned by the city, or the developers, or the corporations involved. The controlling interest belonged to a family trust. A trust established by my grandmother. A trust with one managing authority. One decision maker. One person capable of approving or blocking any major development. Me. Hannah Brooks. For several seconds, I simply stared. Certain I'd misunderstood. This isn't possible. It is. No. I looked again. The words hadn't changed. Neither had the signatures. Neither had the legal language. I sat back in stunned silence. My grandmother had left me control. Not ownership. Control. There was a difference. An enormous difference. The kind of difference lawyers spend careers arguing about. And apparently, nobody outside a tiny circle knew. Not Olivia. Not Ethan. Not my mother. Possibly not even my father. They don't know. It wasn't a question. William shook his head. No. Why? Because Evelyn wanted the right person making decisions. I laughed bitterly. The right person. Me. William's expression hardened. Yes. Especially you. His certainty caught me off guard. Why? The old man smiled. Not because the answer amused him. Because he already knew it. You spent 11 years helping children succeed. You donate part of your salary every year. You've never asked what someone can do for you before deciding whether they're worth your time. His eyes held mine. Your sister isn't a bad person, Hannah, but she has spent most of her life chasing status. Your grandmother knew the difference. The room fell silent, because deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I drove home through falling snow. My thoughts refused to settle. Every red light brought new questions. Every mile brought new doubts. Why me? Why now? Why had Grandma hidden everything? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen when everyone else found out? Because eventually they would. Secrets never stay buried forever. Especially secrets involving hundreds of millions of dollars. The answer arrived faster than expected. The next evening, Thursday, 6:14 p.m., my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Instinct. The kind that warns you something is about to change. I answered. Hello. Hannah. Her voice sounded different. Warmer. Friendlier. Almost affectionate. That alone told me something was wrong. Hi, Mom. How are you? Interesting. She hadn't asked that question in months. Maybe years. I'm fine. Good. A pause. Then, we should have dinner. There it was. The real reason. I almost smiled. Why? Hannah. The hurt entered her voice immediately. Manufactured. Familiar. Can a mother want to spend time with her daughter? Normally, I would have ignored the manipulation. Tonight I didn't. Not unless she needs something. Silence. Long silence. Then, someone contacted me today. I knew. Before she said another word. I knew. My stomach dropped. William had been right. The secret was out. Or at least part of it. What kind of someone? A lawyer. There it was. The beginning. He mentioned your grandmother's trust. My pulse quickened. And another pause. Then came the question that changed everything. The question that revealed exactly why she was calling. Not because she missed me. Not because she loved me. Not because she regretted excluding me. Because suddenly I mattered. Hannah. Her voice became careful. Very careful. Is it true that you control the Mercer development approval process? I closed my eyes. Slowly. And in that moment, for the first time in my entire life, I understood exactly how my grandmother had felt. Because suddenly, everyone who ignored me was about to remember my name. And this was only the beginning, the call that changed everything. For several seconds, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I suddenly understood exactly why my mother was calling. The warmth in her voice. The concern. The sudden desire for dinner. The sudden interest in my life. None of it was about me. It was about access. Access to something valuable. Something they wanted. Something they needed. And for the first time in 33 years, I was the gatekeeper. Hannah. My mother's voice pulled me back. I'm here. Well. I walked toward the window. Snow drifted past the streetlights outside. The same apartment. The same life. The same teacher. Nothing about me had changed. And yet somehow everything had. Who told you? A lawyer. Not surprising. Large development projects involved armies of attorneys. Eventually, one of them had discovered the trust structure. Eventually, questions had been asked. Eventually, the information reached Ethan's family. And eventually, it reached mine. Hannah. My mother hesitated. Why didn't you tell us? I almost laughed. Why didn't I tell them? The irony was breathtaking. For years, they hadn't wanted to know anything about my life. Now they were upset I hadn't shared details. Nobody asked. Silence. Then, this is serious. I know. A great many people are depending on this project. There it was. Not concern. Pressure. The opening move. The first attempt to make me responsible for everyone else's expectations. I had spent years carrying burdens that weren't mine. This time felt different. This time I saw it happening. And once you see something clearly, it becomes difficult to ignore. I understand. You do. Yes. I kept my voice calm. I understand that people made plans before verifying who actually controlled the approvals. The silence that followed spoke volumes. My mother wasn't used to resistance. She wasn't used to me pushing back. Most importantly, she wasn't used to me being right. The next day, Ethan called. Personally. Not an assistant. Not a lawyer. Not a representative. Him. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Hannah. His voice sounded surprisingly nervous. Thanks for taking the call. No problem. A brief pause. Then, I owe you an apology. That wasn't what I expected. For what? For the engagement dinner. I said nothing. Ethan continued. I didn't know. Interesting. Not I'm sorry you were hurt. Not I'm sorry they excluded you. A simple statement. I didn't know. And somehow it sounded genuine. I believe that. The tension in his voice eased slightly. Good. Another pause. Then, I'd like to meet. Straight to the point. Business people appreciate efficiency. Why? Because there are things I need to understand. That was fair. There were things I needed to understand too. After a moment, I agreed. We met Saturday morning. A small coffee shop near the lake. Neutral territory. No lawyers. No family. No audience. Just two people trying to understand a situation neither of them expected. Ethan arrived first. When I entered, he stood. Just as William Mercer had. Interesting. Respect often reveals itself through small actions. He looked tired. Far more tired than he had appeared in the engagement photographs. Life had clearly become complicated. Thanks for coming. You're welcome. We sat. Ordered coffee. Waited for privacy. Then Ethan surprised me again. Hannah. His expression was serious. I need to ask a difficult question. Okay. Did Olivia know? There it was. The question haunting him. The question keeping him awake at night. I considered carefully before answering. As far as I know, no. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Not completely. Just enough. He nodded. I believe you. The relief in his eyes seemed genuine. Which told me something important. He wanted Olivia innocent. He wasn't looking for reasons to leave. He was looking for reasons to stay. That realization softened something inside me. For nearly 2 hours we talked. Not about money. Not about the development. Not even about the trust. We talked about family. Expectations. Pressure. Identity. The invisible burdens people carry. Eventually, Ethan stared out the cafe window. When I met Olivia, he smiled faintly. She was different. What do you mean? Less concerned with appearances. His voice carried disappointment. Or maybe I just didn't notice. I understood. Sometimes people don't change. Sometimes we simply see them more clearly. Do you love her? The question escaped before I could stop it. Ethan looked surprised. Then thoughtful. Finally. Yes. A simple answer. No hesitation. No performance. Just truth. And for some reason that mattered. Because despite everything, I didn't actually want Olivia hurt. I wanted her to grow. There was a difference. A massive difference. One my grandmother understood. One my family never had. 3 days later, the first family meeting happened. Predictably, my mother organized it. Not at my apartment. Not somewhere neutral. At her house. Her territory. Her rules. Or at least, that had always been the assumption. When I arrived, everyone was already there. Mom. Dad. Olivia. Ethan. The atmosphere felt tense enough to crack glass. Nobody smiled. Nobody pretended this was a normal gathering. For several moments, nobody spoke at all. Then Olivia finally broke. Why you? The question exploded from her. Years of frustration packed into 2 words. I looked at her. Really looked. For the first time in a long time. She looked exhausted. Scared. Angry. Human. Why me what? The trust. The approvals. The responsibility. Her voice shook. Why did Grandma choose you? The room became very quiet. Because everyone wanted the answer. Including me. For years, I had wondered the same thing. I took a slow breath. Then answered honestly. I don't know. Olivia blinked. Clearly expecting something else. Something dramatic. Something triumphant. Instead, I continued. But I think I understand part of it. No one interrupted. Grandma didn't choose the smartest person. Or the richest. Or the most successful. I looked around the room. She chose the person she trusted. The words landed heavily. Especially because I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Truth rarely needs help. My mother immediately became defensive. That's unfair. Is it? You're implying we can't be trusted. No. I shook my head. I'm saying Grandma made her choice. The distinction mattered. Because I wasn't attacking anyone. I was simply refusing to apologize for something I hadn't done. A skill I was finally learning. Then something unexpected happened. Dad spoke. Actually spoke. Not a sentence. Not a comment. A real opinion. For perhaps the first time in years. Hannah's right. Everyone turned toward him. Including me. My father looked uncomfortable. But determined. Mom trusted Hannah. He swallowed. And if we're honest. Another pause. We all know why. Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. The answer sat in the room between us. Visible. Painful. True. Because trust isn't built through words. It's built through actions. Over years. Over decades. One decision at a time. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end, no major decisions had been made. No dramatic speeches delivered. No miraculous reconciliation achieved. Real life rarely works that way. But something important happened. The pretending stopped. For the first time in years, everyone spoke honestly. The conversations were uncomfortable. Messy. Painful. Necessary. And sometimes, that's what progress looks like. That evening, after everyone left, Olivia asked me to stay. Just for a minute. We sat alone in my parents' living room. The same room where we'd opened Christmas presents as children. The same room where years of comparisons had quietly accumulated. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia finally whispered. I didn't realize. I looked at her. What? How bad it got. There was no defense in her voice. No manipulation. No strategy. Just regret. The genuine kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that forces people to change. Tears gathered in her eyes. I thought Mom was harder on you. She laughed sadly. But I didn't understand how much. For the first time in years, I believed her. Not because she deserved automatic forgiveness. Because she sounded honest. And honesty is rare. Especially in families. Before leaving, Olivia asked one final question. What happens now? I smiled slightly. The answer surprised even me. We start over. She blinked. Just like that. No. I stood. It's going to take years. Trust always does. But if we're going to rebuild anything, I looked at my younger sister. We should probably stop pretending everything was fine. She nodded slowly. For once, neither of us had anything else to say. As I drove home that night, I thought about my grandmother. About the letter. About William Mercer. About the trust. About all the choices that had led here. For years, I believed power meant control. Now I understood something different. Power is responsibility. Exactly like Grandma wrote. And responsibility isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right when doing what's easy would be simpler. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. My family wouldn't magically transform. Olivia still had lessons to learn. My mother still had habits to break. My father still had courage to develop. And I still had healing to do. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. Not because of money. Not because of status. Not because of authority. Because I finally saw my own value. And once that happens, nobody can take it away. The boardroom showdown. 3 weeks after the family meeting, I found myself standing in front of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The headquarters of Mercer Development Group. 47 floors of steel, glass, and money. The kind of building designed to impress people before they even entered. The kind of place my mother would have described as success. I stared up at it for a moment, then walked inside. Because today wasn't about being impressed. Today was about making a decision. A decision worth more than $200 million. And everyone in that building knew it. The elevator opened onto the 39th floor. Immediately, I noticed the tension. Assistants spoke quietly. Executives moved quickly. Lawyers occupied nearly every conference room. Something big was happening. Or rather, something big was waiting for me to happen. A receptionist approached. Miss Brooks. Yes. This way, please. She led me down a hallway lined with photographs of completed developments. Luxury apartments. Hotels. Corporate headquarters. Projects worth billions. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of enormous wooden doors. The boardroom. The receptionist opened them. And suddenly, every conversation stopped. 22 people sat around a massive conference table. Investors. Attorneys. Consultants. Executives. Developers. And every single one of them turned toward me. The public school teacher. The woman nobody had considered important 6 months ago. The woman who now held the final approval. Ethan stood. Thank you for coming. I nodded politely. Then took the empty chair, waiting at the center of the table. An interesting choice. Not at the end. Not in a corner. The center. Exactly where everyone could see me. Exactly where every decision would become impossible to ignore. A gray-haired attorney immediately began speaking. Miss Brooks, we're grateful for your time. Translation. Please don't destroy our project. I remained silent. He continued. For the last 6 years, we've been planning the North Shore Development Initiative. Charts appeared on large screens. Financial projections. Construction plans. Economic forecasts. revenue estimates. Everything looked impressive. Everyone in the room seemed confident, prepared, certain, until I asked a simple question. How many families will be displaced? Silence. The attorney blinked. Clearly, that wasn't the question he expected. Excuse me. How many families currently live on the affected properties? The room became noticeably less comfortable. Finally, another executive answered. Approximately 112. I nodded slowly. And where will they go? Nobody answered immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Because when people spend 6 years planning a project and don't have a quick answer, that answer usually isn't good. The presentation continued. I listened carefully, took notes, asked questions. Lots of questions. Questions nobody else seemed interested in asking. Questions about schools, community resources, affordable housing, environmental impact, small businesses, public transportation. The further we went, the more uncomfortable the room became. Eventually, one investor lost patience. With respect, his voice carried obvious irritation. This project will create tremendous economic value. I looked at him. I'm sure it will. Then what's the concern? The answer came naturally. Value for whom? Silence. Again. The investor didn't have a response. Because that's the problem with certain types of success. They measure what can be counted, not what matters. After 2 hours, the formal presentation ended. Most people expected a decision. They weren't getting one. Not yet. As executives gathered documents and attorneys whispered among themselves, Ethan approached. You saw something. It wasn't a question. I smiled slightly. You know me better than that. He laughed. A little nervously. What did you find? Instead of answering, I opened a folder. A folder William Mercer had given me 3 days earlier. A folder nobody else knew existed, including Ethan. I slid a document across the table. His eyes moved across the page, then widened. He read it again, then a third time. Slowly, carefully, as though hoping the words might change. They didn't. Oh my God. The room immediately became quiet. Everyone noticed his reaction. Everyone wanted to know why. I simply waited. Because some discoveries deserve a moment. What is it? One of the attorneys stood. Ethan looked up. His face had gone pale. Stop the meeting. The attorney frowned. What? Now? Nobody moved. Nobody understood. Ethan turned the document around. The attorney read it. Then froze. Exactly the same reaction. Within seconds, the paper moved around the room. One executive after another. One lawyer after another. One investor after another. Each person reading. Each person reacting. Shock. Disbelief. Confusion. Fear. And finally, understanding. The document wasn't a financial report. It wasn't a legal dispute. It wasn't an ownership challenge. It was older than all of that. Much older. A historical preservation agreement signed decades earlier. An agreement nobody had paid attention to. Because nobody knew it existed. Until now. The agreement protected a small section of the development property. A section everyone considered insignificant. Just 5 acres. 5 acres out of 40. Nothing special. Except for one detail. According to newly discovered records, that land contained the original site of a community settlement established by freed African American families after the Civil War. One of the earliest settlements of its kind in Illinois. a place of enormous historical significance, a place historians had spent decades searching for, a place many experts believed had been destroyed. It hadn't. It was sitting beneath the development site, protected by documents my grandmother had quietly preserved. The implications hit immediately. Construction couldn't continue. Not legally. Not until a complete historical review occurred. Archaeologists would need access. State agencies would need access. Federal reviews would need access. Years of planning suddenly became uncertain. Not because of money. Because of history. The boardroom erupted. People spoke over each other. Lawyers argued. Investors panicked. Phones appeared. Emails flew. Everyone searched desperately for solutions. Everyone except me. And William Mercer, who sat quietly at the far end of the room. Watching. Observing. Waiting. Eventually he stood. The room fell silent. 90 years old. And still the most respected person in the building. Enough. One word. Total silence. William looked around the room, then pointed toward me. Do you know why Evelyn trusted Hannah? Nobody answered. William continued. Because everyone else sees land. His eyes moved across the room. Dollar signs. Buildings. Profits. Leverage. Then he looked directly at me. Hannah sees people. The silence became absolute. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. A week later, the story exploded across national media. News outlets covered it everywhere. Historians, archaeologists, local leaders, community organizations. Everyone became interested. Suddenly, the forgotten settlement wasn't forgotten anymore. Suddenly, people cared. And with every new article, my grandmother's reputation grew. Not as a wealthy woman, not as a secret investor, but as someone who protected history when nobody else thought it mattered. Exactly the kind of thing she would do. Then came the hardest decision. Because eventually, Ethan presented a new proposal. A different proposal. A smaller project. Less profitable. Less glamorous. But one that preserved the historical site completely. The investors hated it. Naturally. It reduced profits significantly. But it protected the community. Protected the history. Protected the promise my grandmother had spent decades honoring. The final decision belonged to me. And everyone knew it. The approval meeting took place on a rainy Thursday morning. The same boardroom. The same people. The same pressure. But this time, something felt different. When I entered, nobody looked at me like an obstacle. Nobody looked at me like a problem. They looked at me like the decision maker. Respect had finally arrived. Not because they wanted something. Because they'd learned who I was. There's a difference. A huge difference. And for the first time, everyone in the room understood it. I sat down, opened the approval folder, and prepared to give my answer. The answer that would change every life connected to the project. The answer my grandmother somehow seemed to anticipate years before she died. I took a breath, looked around the room, and began to speak the decision that couldn't be bought. The boardroom was silent. Not the ordinary kind of silence. Not the silence of people waiting for a presentation. This was the silence of people waiting for a verdict. The kind of silence that changes lives. 23 pairs of eyes watched me. Investors. Lawyers. Developers. Executives. My family. Ethan. And at the far end of the table, William Mercer. The only person in the room who didn't look nervous. Because somehow he already knew what I was going to do. Maybe my grandmother had known too. I opened the approval folder. The final proposal sat on top. The revised development plan. Months of redesign. Millions of dollars in adjustments. A completely different project from the one originally proposed. The old version would have erased history. The new version protected it. At a cost. A very expensive cost. One investor had estimated the changes would reduce profits by nearly $80 million. A number large enough to make most people panic. Apparently, it wasn't large enough to buy my approval. I looked around the room, then finally spoke. I've made my decision. The tension became almost physical. Everyone leaned forward, waiting, hopping, praying. I approved the revised proposal. For a moment, nobody reacted, as though the words needed time to register. Then relief swept across the room. Visible relief. People exhaled. Shoulders relaxed. Several executives exchanged glances. The project would move forward. Not exactly as planned, but it would move forward. And the historical site would remain protected forever. Then I continued speaking, and the relief vanished. There are conditions. Of course there were. My grandmother hadn't spent decades protecting something just so people could pretend to care at the last minute. One attorney immediately grabbed a pen. Go ahead. I opened another folder. A much thicker one. First, I looked directly at the investors. 15% of project profits will fund community education programs. Several executives stiffened. I ignored them. Second, the historical site will include a public learning center. Free admission. Permanent funding. No objections yet. Interesting. Third, I continued. The construction contracts must include local hearing requirements. That finally triggered reactions. Several investors exchanged concerned looks. One executive opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because everyone knew something important. I didn't need their approval. They needed mine. For nearly an hour we negotiated. Numbers changed. Percentages moved. Language was refined. But the core protections remained. By the end, the final agreement looked very different from the project originally imagined. Less profitable. More responsible. More human. Exactly the way my grandmother would have wanted. When the last signature dried, William Mercer smiled. Not a business smile. Not a victory smile. A proud smile. The kind grandparents wear. The kind mentors earn. The kind people rarely forget. The story should have ended there. But life rarely ends when we expect it to. 3 weeks later, William Mercer called. Hannah. His voice sounded weaker than usual. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. I need you to come by. Something about his tone made me cancel my afternoon classes immediately. I found him sitting in the library of his estate. A massive room lined with books. The kind of room that smelled like history. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked old. Very old. 90 years had finally started showing. Yet his eyes remained sharp. Focused. Determined. There's one last thing. I sat across from him. What is it? William pointed toward a wooden box resting on the table. Dark oak. Simple. Unremarkable. Except for the name engraved on top. Evelyn Brooks. My grandmother. My heart immediately sped up. What is this? William smiled softly. The final thing she left behind. I stared at the box. My grandmother had been gone for years. And somehow she was still surprising me. Still guiding me. Still shaping events. Why now? William leaned back. Because this wasn't meant for the woman you were. His eyes met mine. It was meant for the woman you've become. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Part pride, part sadness, part longing. The kind of emotion that arrives when someone believes in you long after they're gone. Inside the box sat several journals, dozens of handwritten notebooks, letters, photographs, documents, an entire lifetime preserved in ink. I carefully opened the first journal. The handwriting was instantly familiar. Grandma's. Neat. Precise. Patient. I began reading. And within minutes, everything changed. Again. The journals revealed something nobody knew. Not my parents. Not Olivia. Not even William Mercer. Because some secrets my grandmother had carried alone. For more than 40 years. One journal entry in particular stopped me cold. It was dated October 12, 1985. The year before my mother got married. The year before my parents started their family. The entry described a meeting. A business meeting. One that nearly destroyed everything. I kept reading. And suddenly understood why my grandmother had structured the trust the way she did. Why she had hidden assets. Why she had protected the land. Why she had chosen me. Because decades earlier, someone had tried to take everything. And that someone wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a business rival. It wasn't a corrupt investor. It wasn't even a member of the Mercer family. It was someone much closer. Someone connected to my family. Someone whose actions had permanently changed the course of our lives. The journal revealed a painful truth. My grandfather hadn't lost the family fortune through bad luck. Or poor investments. Or market crashes. He had trusted the wrong person. A relative. Someone he loved. Someone he believed. That person manipulated business records. Diverted money. Destroyed partnerships. And vanished before anyone understood the damage. The betrayal nearly ruined the entire family. My grandmother spent decades rebuilding what remained. Quietly. Patiently. Without recognition. Without praise. Without help. And in the middle of one journal entry, she wrote a sentence that left me speechless. Wealth is easy to inherit, character is not. I read it 3 times. Then 4. Because suddenly everything made sense. The trust. The secrecy. The tests. The responsibility. She had never been protecting money. She had been protecting values. For the next several weeks, I read every journal. Every page. Every note. Every lesson. And a pattern emerged. Again and again, my grandmother returned to the same idea. Not success. Not wealth. Not status. Character. Integrity. Service. Responsibility. She believed those things mattered more than anything else. And she spent her life proving it. One rainy evening, I finally invited Olivia over. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Growth works that way sometimes. Slowly. Unexpectedly. She arrived carrying coffee and an awkward smile. Neither of us were experts at emotional conversations. But we were trying. That counted. I handed her one of the journals. She looked surprised. What is this? Grandma. Olivia opened it. Read a few pages. Then sat quietly. For a very long time. At one point, tears filled her eyes. At another point, she laughed. At another, she simply stared into space. Processing. Understanding. Learning. Exactly the way I had. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely above a whisper. She knew. What? Everything. I nodded. Yeah, Olivia laughed sadly. We spent years trying to impress people. Another laugh. This one smaller. And she spent years trying to help people. The contrast hung in the room. Impossible to ignore. Several months later, construction officially began. The revised project moved forward. The historical site remained protected. The learning center broke ground. Community scholarships launched. Local hearing programs expanded. The development became a national model for responsible urban planning. Exactly the opposite of what investors originally wanted. And exactly what my grandmother would have loved. Then came the biggest surprise of all. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan and Olivia invited me to lunch. Not because they needed approval. Not because they needed access. Not because they needed anything. They simply wanted to spend time together. A normal invitation. The kind families are supposed to make. The kind I'd spent years missing. And for the first time, it felt genuine. As we sat together laughing over lunch, my phone buzzed. A message from William Mercer. Just 3 words. She was right. I smiled. Because I knew exactly what he meant. One day, they'll regret underestimating you. My grandmother had said those words years ago. At the time, I thought she was talking about success. Money. Achievement. Recognition. Now I understood. She wasn't talking about any of those things. She was talking about self-worth. The moment you stop measuring yourself through other people's approval. The moment you understand your value doesn't require permission. The moment you realize being overlooked doesn't make you unimportant. And once you learn that lesson, everything changes. Far across the city, cranes rose above the skyline. Workers built something new. Families built something new. And so did I. Not a development. Not a fortune. Not a legacy. A life. One based on respect instead of approval. Purpose instead of status. And character instead of image. Exactly the inheritance my grandmother intended to leave behind. The letter meant for the future. A year passed. Long enough for life to change. Not long enough to forget. The development project had become one of the most talked about urban projects in Illinois. The historical center was nearing completion. The scholarship fund was helping hundreds of students. The community programs were thriving. And for the first time in decades, the Brooks family wasn't falling apart. We weren't perfect. Far from it. But we were honest. And sometimes that's better. Olivia and Ethan got married in a small ceremony 6 months after construction began. Not the enormous luxury wedding originally planned. Not the society event my mother once dreamed about. Just family. Friends. People who mattered. The guest list included teachers. Neighbors. Former classmates. Community leaders. And even several students I had taught years earlier. At one point during the reception, Olivia pulled me aside. You know what's funny? What? She looked around the room. This wedding is smaller. I nodded. It is. She smiled. It's also happier. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Because we both knew why. People stop performing when they stop trying to impress strangers. William Mercer attended the wedding too. Though age was finally catching up to him. He moved slower now. Talked less. Rested more. Yet his mind remained as sharp as ever. Near the end of the evening, he found me standing outside beneath strings of lights. I have something for you. I laughed. Another secret. His eyes twinkled. Possibly. Then he handed me a small envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. My name written across the front. In my grandmother's handwriting. Again. I stared at it. My heart immediately began racing. No. William smiled. Yes. When did you get this? 10 years ago. I blinked. What? Evelyn mailed it to me. My brain struggled to process that. 10 years. William nodded. She gave very specific instructions. I looked down at the envelope. My name. Her handwriting. One final message. One final mystery. What are the instructions? William smiled. Open it exactly 1 year after the trust became active. I froze. Today's date. Exactly 1 year. Not 1 day more. Not 1 day less. My grandmother had planned this. Years before her death. Years before anyone knew what would happen. Years before anyone knew whether I would succeed or fail. She had known. Or at least hoped. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The same apartment. The same living room. The same bookshelf filled with student gifts. But everything felt different. Because I was different. Slowly, carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside sat a single folded letter. 3 pages. Written entirely by hand. The first line immediately made my eyes water. If you are reading this, then you chose people over profit. I stopped breathing. Then slowly continued. Good. That means I was right about you. A laugh escaped me despite the tears. That sounded exactly like Grandma. No dramatic introduction. No long explanation. Straight to the point. By now, you've probably learned many family secrets. Some pleasant. Some painful. Some disappointing. There is one more. I sat up straighter. One more. After everything. Apparently, yes. This secret is not about money. It is not about property. It is not about the trust. It is about your mother. I froze. Completely. My mother. What secret could possibly remain? With growing unease, I kept reading. And within seconds, the entire world shifted. 40 years earlier. Long before I was born. Long before Olivia was born. My parents had desperately wanted children. For years. Nothing worked. Treatments failed. Doctors delivered bad news. Hope slowly disappeared. Then one winter, something happened. A newborn baby girl was abandoned outside a church 20 miles from Chicago. Healthy. Safe. Unclaimed. No identifying information. No family records. Nothing. The child entered the adoption system. 3 months later, my parents adopted her. I stopped reading. My hands trembled. My pulse thundered. No. 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 I looked at the page again. The words hadn't changed. The meaning remained. One truth. Impossible. Life-changing. Terrifying. The adopted child wasn't Olivia. It was me. The room spun. I set the letter down. Then immediately picked it back up. Certain I'd misunderstood. Certain there had to be another explanation. There wasn't. Every line confirmed it. Every detail supported it. Every date matched. I wasn't biologically related to my parents. I wasn't biologically related to Olivia. I wasn't a Brooks by blood. I became one through choice. Through love. Through adoption. Tears blurred the page. Not because I was angry. Because suddenly, so many things made sense. Things I had spent years wondering about. Questions I never knew how to ask. Feelings I never understood. I continued reading. Your parents always intended to tell you. But fear became delay. Delay became years. Years became silence. And eventually, they didn't know how. I closed my eyes. That sounded painfully believable. Humans often make mistakes not from cruelty, but from fear. Then came the part that shattered me completely. Your mother loved you from the moment she first held you. She worried constantly that one day you would discover the truth and leave. She feared you would feel less loved, less wanted, less hers. Nothing could be further from the truth. I wiped away tears. More tears followed. Because suddenly, I understood something. My mother's favoritism had hurt me. Deeply. For years. But beneath all her flaws, there had also been fear. Fear of losing something precious. Fear of failing. Fear of being judged. Fear doesn't excuse mistakes, but it explains them. Sometimes that's enough to begin healing. The final page contained one last revelation. A revelation nobody else knew. Not William. Not Olivia. Not even my parents. Only my grandmother. Years before I was adopted, my grandmother had volunteered at the same church where I was found. She was one of the first people who saw me. One of the first people who held me. One of the first people who prayed for me. And when my parents eventually decided to adopt, she immediately recognized my name. Recognized my face. Recognized the tiny birthmark on my shoulder. She never told anyone. Not because she wanted a secret. Because she believed something. Something beautiful. The final paragraph explained everything. Family is not created by blood. Family is created by the people who choose you. Again and again. Year after year. Even when life becomes difficult. Even when mistakes are made. Even when forgiveness is required. I cried openly then. The kind of crying that comes once every few years. The kind that cleans old wounds. The kind that leaves peace behind. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't call first. I didn't warn anyone. I simply showed up. Mom opened the door. Took one look at my face. And immediately knew. The color drained from her cheeks. Oh God. A whisper. Barely audible. You know. I nodded. Tears instantly filled her eyes. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she began crying. The helpless kind. The terrified kind. The kind she'd probably carried for decades. I'm sorry. The words poured out. Again. And again. And again. Not just for the secret. For everything. The comparisons. The favoritism. The distance. The hurt. All of it. Years of regret finally finding words. Then she asked the question she'd feared most. The question she'd apparently carried for 33 years. Do you hate me? The answer came immediately. Without hesitation. Without doubt. No. She broke completely. And so did I. Because the truth was simple. She wasn't perfect. Neither was I. Neither was anyone. But she had chosen me. 33 years earlier. When she didn't have to. When there was no guarantee. When there was only hope. And despite every mistake that followed, that choice still mattered. Months later, the historical center officially opened. Thousands attended. Students toured exhibits. Families explored the grounds. Historians celebrated discoveries. Community leaders gave speeches. And at the entrance stood a bronze plaque. A tribute to Evelyn Brooks. The woman who protected history. Protected people. And protected a family. Even when they didn't understand it. As the ceremony ended, I stood quietly beside William Mercer. He smiled. Proud of her. I laughed softly. Every day. William nodded. So am I. We stood together, watching visitors enter the center. Watching children run across the grounds. watching history continue. And for the first time, everything felt complete. Some people inherit money. Some inherit property. Some inherit influence. I inherited something better. A lesson. One my grandmother spent a lifetime teaching. Your worth is not determined by wealth, or status, or popularity, or approval. Your worth comes from what you choose to do with the life you've been given. And if you're lucky, one day you'll realize that being underestimated isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's the beginning of your greatest story.